Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, the podcast focused on the carnivore diet and lifestyle, with practical advice from successful carnivores, citizen scientists, and top researchers. I'm your host, Scott Meslinski, and I'm here to speak with experts and experienced carnivores to get answers to your biggest and meatiest questions while helping you live your best life as a carnivore. Danny Vega, Keto Counterculture and at FatFueledFamily, is an expert in strength, conditioning, and performance and how to apply nutrition to optimize all of these. I've been following Danny for years and would describe him as a jacked, wise, considerate, and generous philosopher-king of keto. Danny has a MS in human performance from the University of Florida. His passions include ketogenic and carnivore dieting, strength and conditioning, stoicism, libertarianism, and of course, raising his sons Dean and Desmond in a holistic way with his equally amazing wife, Maura. Welcome to the show, Danny.
Dude, thanks for having me. That is an awesome introduction. You pretty much nailed all the things I love. I love it.
I think this is going to be a great conversation. I followed you and your content for a long time, and I just think you have so much to add to my audience and to the keto and carnivore communities. I'd love to just start, Danny, with what got you personally hooked on keto, and even further into sharing keto through social media?
Well, that's a good question, man. I'm going to just answer that by saying what I loved about it when I started, because I think by now people have heard my story. I mean, I'll try to give the intro to how I got to keto real quickly because I don't want to bore people who've heard it. But basically, my whole life I've been in sports and I've trained my whole life and I've played several sports and competed. And, my first career was, my office was a weight room. So, I mean, I've always loved lifting. I was a strength and conditioning coach. I was the head strength and conditioning coach for VCU basketball in Virginia. And, of course, I worked in the weight room at the University of Florida as a grad assistant, and I played football. And so for me, this has always been a passion of mine, but keto was something I just never knew about. And I heard about it several years ago, and I thought it was really odd and bizarre. And I didn't understand. I just couldn't. The way I was trained, similarly to most people, is that, carbohydrates are the only fuel for performance. And to eat healthy, you have to, eat, whole foods and, watch your calories and make sure that, you don't eat too much and try to eat the rainbow and, eat all these different carb sources to maximize your performance. And then when I got injured in 2016, I was at a crossroads. And so I started to say, hey, let me try to get healthier. I had inflammation. I just felt like crap from years of I played on turf, and it was AstroTurf in college, and it was brutal. Powerlifting beat up my body. And so for that reason, I pulled out of my last meet because of a torn meniscus in my left knee. And when I finally got to keto, it was after several months of dieting, the traditional way. And I just was like, I was tired of it, and I was going to basically just reverse diet back up. And then I thought, you know what, let me see about this keto thing, because I had people telling me about it. My buddy Trevor was telling me about it. So I finally started in June of 2016. And luckily for me, people asked me, I was just talking to a friend the other day. He's like, how was your transition? And I was like, well, I didn't really have a bad transition because I was already at the point where I was basically low carb, which is based, a lot of the time is the carbs are low, the fat is low, and you just don't feel good. I mean, it's probably a pretty effective way to lose weight and be healthy if you eat enough, but most of the time people don't eat enough that way. And so for me, I just felt like crap. And when I added fat back in, and then I lowered the carbs even more. It was, my carbs were under 100 at the end of the cut, but, my fat was at 50. It was terrible. And so when I started keto, I think I immediately bumped up the calories by like 300, and I felt amazing, and I continued to melt. I was like, holy crap, I'm already as lean as I want to be. I had to up my calories over the period of a few weeks by 700 calories just to keep from losing more weight, which was never a problem for me before. It was always easy to gain weight, but for me, losing weight, past a certain point, I was never that guy. I'm more of like a mesomorph, which, you know, I'm not like an ectomorph, you know? So I was not that guy. I knew friends that, you know, when they stopped training, they would lose weight. And me, when I stopped training, I would gain weight. So, you know, when I started keto, I immediately experienced like that. The inflammation was way down. The cravings were way down. And then, my brain was on fire and I had more productivity. I had more energy. I remember I would always park further and further away from where I needed to go so I could walk and get some of this energy out. And I started to think about things I never thought about before, like running half marathons and doing obstacle course races. And I always did well with that after being keto. And now I just find myself being a much more well-rounded person. And my whole life, my favorite food was barbecue. But when I was younger, you know, of course that included like the sauces and stuff. And then when I started to learn about this whole carnivore thing and that it may not be a bad thing to just eat meat. I mean, it was just so simple and just so, it was amazing. You know, I was like, well, if I can hit my micronutrient, you know, requirements with just meat, you know, for the most part, then why wouldn't I? And so in August of last year, it was just a little bit over a year, like a year and a few months that I had been keto. And I just went strict carnivore for a month. And the first month was just salmon and anything from a cow. So like, you know, I was eating organ meats and beef and, you know, steak and ground beef. And then, after that month, then I brought the eggs back in and the bacon. And then there were a few months there that I fell off and I would just eat some fat bombs because I was stressed and I would stress eat. And for the most part, this last year, a little bit over a year, most of the meals I eat are meat. And then in the last 4 or 5 months, I've done things where like, okay, I'll have one meal. Like I'll give you an example. Today, my first meal was a bunch of ground beef with liverwurst and some wet biltong that I got from my buddy from South Africa. And I added a little bit of guacamole and some butternut squash. And this could be something we talk about as we continue through this podcast, but it's, for me, my output is pretty high. So like, for instance, this morning I did, you know, hot yoga and then, you know, had some coffee with Ben. Me and Ben Pekulski, like we do hot yoga in the morning and then like an hour after we stop. So we do hot yoga from 6 to 7, then we'll train. And then, you know, it's me, Derek and Ben. Yeah. And we trained and we crushed legs and it wasn't the hardest workout, but all of us were a little bit detrained because we had been all traveling the last month and a half or so. And it crushed me. And I woke up this morning. And this is the thing, like, and it's a beautiful thing with carnivore because, you know, this last week I've been pretty strict with the carnivore because we were traveling and then we were in places where the food choices weren't great. So I'd just eat meat and eggs and just keep it pretty simple. And I probably lost like 7 pounds in a week. And I woke up this morning, I was like, crap, I'm freaking dry and I look good. And I forgot that the last time I felt that way was a few months ago when I was in the thick of training with Ben and Derek, getting Derek ready for the Olympia. And that workout was brutal. I was cramping. And so when that happens, because I have a genetic SNP that, you know, causes me to cramp even more than a regular person would cramp. So hydration becomes a huge issue for me. And I have a bunch of salt and I take 500 milligrams of magnesium every day, and I'm just pounding electrolytes all day. But I find that if I just add, especially after the workout, I add a little bit of carbs, whether it's like, and it's a small list of things that I eat. So it'll be like a cabbage or avocado. Those are my two main that I love, and sauerkraut, of course. And then you know, every now and then some blueberries, or let's see what else. I mean, I try to stay away from all the nuts and stuff, but I just eat them because I love them. It's not, if I eat nuts, it's because I love them. You know, if I eat like macadamias, but like adding these small amounts of carbs, it really helps me. And it's not only in the workout, it's it's throughout the day. Like if I don't do these things, like on days that I'm training really, really hard, I'll cramp all day. I won't be able to walk. Like my wife will make fun of me. She'll film me sometimes. And so for me, if I'm not training really hard, carnivore is the best, but if I'm training super, super hard, then I have to add some sort of carbohydrate source. And it doesn't even have to be a lot. Like today was a high day, and I think I'll end up at 35 grams of carbs. So yeah. It's still mostly meat, and I try to tell people, like, and this is what we're talking about. Like, we're doing this Fat Fueled Family program, and we're trying to tell people how to make their kids eat healthier and help their kids eat healthier. And, we always say start with protein. Maura and I are big believers in animal protein. That needs to be the cornerstone of your diet. Now, if you want to add other stuff because you like it and you tolerate it well, sure. But, it has to start with animal flesh.
Hi, folks. Thanks for listening. If you're enjoying the show and want to dive deeper into keto and performance, you'll probably enjoy the Human podcast, spelled HVMN. I don't receive any money for saying this. I just like their content a lot. Their podcast is an excellent, evidence-based, nuanced show, and they aren't afraid to discuss differing perspectives. Here's a short clip of their host, Jeff Wu, with Alex Hutchinson discussing low-carb, high-fat for endurance performance and the rising practice of periodization and cycling diets.
Maybe it just takes time for people to just realize that the human system, like any other system, is a system that encapsulates much more than just one or two variables to think about.
I think you're 100% correct with that. And it's a problem that we have all the time, because we'll get challenged by people who will ask, well, I thought you needed to drink just water. You're telling me I need this, or the classic ones in sport recently that I can remember are, and you'll be very familiar with this one with what you guys do, is carbohydrates. You either are pro carbohydrate and think you should eat it 3 times a day, right, and in between meals and all the time, or you're anti carbohydrate.
Right. You're a keto fanatic.
Yeah, you just live on bacon, almonds. But we saw it not too long ago as well when running with shoes, barefoot shoes, ultra cushioned shoes, right, or stability shoes. Like you say, they always seem to be polarized, and people want the answer. They want a soundbite.
Now let's get back to Danny Vega. I love, Danny, how you have the perspectives of an athlete, both in terms of now body recomposition and hypertrophy style training, but also in your past strength training. And I've seen also on the rower, you're incorporating endurance as well. So I think you'll have a lot of good perspectives across all of those. And I wanted to ask you, why you're moving back towards keto, but that makes a lot of sense with the carbs around performance and helping with hydration and recovery. But just quickly, going back a little bit, when you moved from carnivore to keto, last fall and into this year, what additional benefits did you experience from dropping those trace carbs?
You mean from keto to carnivore?
Yes. From keto to carnivore.
Oh, yeah, man. Well, I told people, and this was especially in the beginning, I was like, I'm going to make a statement right now that is probably kind of provocative, but I felt like the control over cravings and appetite, the difference between keto and carnivore was greater than the difference between the standard American diet and keto. Like carnivore was so effective. I was like, and as time went on, I was like, I can't believe this. Like, and people were like, how do you eat the same thing every day? And I was like, listen, as time goes on, all I do is crave meat more. Like you show me a picture of a steak any day and I'm like, oh, that's amazing. Like, my feed is full of pictures of meat and steak. And, I'm actually going to take over. I won't talk about it quite yet because it's going to be next week, but I'm taking over a big, supplement stores Instagram. And so, they're like, well, you can't just be putting pictures of meat all day when you do that, because we have a lot of people who have a different lifestyle. So we want to be more inclusive. So I was like, okay, I totally understand that, because they looked at my feed and they see the amounts of meat. And even for most people who don't know my past and don't know that, a lot of the time I'm associated with carnivore, and I love carnivore. I support that movement a lot. But at the same time, if a carnivore looks at it, they'll be like, well, are you not carnivore anymore? Why aren't you carnivore? And, a lot of the time it's for me, I'm like, should I explain myself? And I'm like, okay, maybe I should, because people are like probably thinking this is something that I'm recommending to others. But for me, this is what works. Now, for my wife, she can't do what I do, because for her, carnivore is like, it's like a necessity. When she doesn't eat strict carnivore, she feels terrible. And so there's a lot of people that are like that. And Michaela Peterson, I think of her. And I think of course, other people who this was like the last straw, and they tried it, and this was the only thing that works. But, for me, I guess it's kind of nice that I have the flexibility to eat a few different foods without my gut being messed up or having autoimmune issues, but I'm still very selective. And there's a really interesting, now, I don't know if you've heard of, I'm sure you have, the paleomedicina people like Dr. Toth and Dr. Clemens. Well, if you know about their protocol, it's really interesting, because obviously it's pretty much a carnivore protocol. They have a few different things that they control for. They keep a ratio of 2-to-1 fat to protein. But the interesting thing is that the only real plants that they say, hey, this is okay, are things like tubers. And then they say, they're obviously against sweeteners and sugar, but they'll use some honey. And so this is a protocol that they're doing with patients who their main focus is, gut permeability and fixing that, because everything starts with the gut. But like, no one has looked at that for performance. So for me, I would love to try to take their approach and make it more for performance, because I cannot use a 2-to-1 fat to protein ratio, because for me to get enough protein, my fat would look for me to get a decent amount of protein. Let's say I cut my protein down to 150 grams, which is pretty low for me. I feel like I would be wanting more meat if I did that.
Yeah, you're a big guy.
Yeah, I'm 225 now, and I got up to 245 after my son got hit by the truck. I stress ate for like a month, and I gained like 15 pounds. So I've lost the weight again, but I'm still big, and I like today I'll end up at like 230 grams of protein. So for me to cut down my fat, then my protein to 150, then I got to double it and eat 300 grams of fat, which for the past year now, my fat has been way lower, and I've been much more comfortable with much less added fat to my plate. That doesn't make sense. So I think that, if I can keep the ratios more towards something that works for performance, but keep the things that they eliminate, like they eliminate all dairy. They don't like any vegetable oil. So no MCT oil, no coconut oil. I've just in the past week and a half got rid of MCT oil and gotten rid of all the plant oils, so no more avocado oil. I'm just trying to stick with more lard and tallow and beef and meats. But then I'll add those tubers. So I'll eat some sweet potato, or I'll eat the butternut squash today was great because it kind of tastes like sweet potato, but it's less carby. That would be kind of a cool thing. So I'm trying to talk with them to see if I can talk, at least with Dr. Clemens, maybe to see, if she's thought about, kind of changing this or applying it to athletes.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I like how, you're constantly experimenting, Danny, and you're not afraid to say when you think you're wrong or have changed your mind about things like fat, protein, vegetables, tubers.
Oh yeah, the protein. That's a good one. If you followed me this whole time, you've probably seen, when I first started, I was like, I'm also very contrarian. And that's why this whole keto counterculture, it's I don't want to be, but I always find that conventional wisdom sucks. It's why it's terrible. It's like, it's almost like, okay, what is the prevailing thought? Okay, let me explore the opposite because that's probably what's true. And yeah, I'll always admit when I'm wrong. And the other thing that I'll always be is honest. You know, I have heard things about people who portray themselves and they don't actually do it. Like, I didn't even think that could be a thing, but there are people out there talking about, I do this, and they don't. And that blows my mind, you know, like, why not be yourself? You know, so for me, I'm like, if I'm going to eat some carbs or I'm going to eat some, I'm going to put it on there. Now, sometimes I'll post about it, but I won't allow comments because I don't want to deal with it, but I'm still not going to lie, you know, so it's definitely, we're all learning. And I think it's important to be honest at all times, and especially to admit when you learn something new and you're switching things up, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you think about, Danny, the value of, you know, your love of experimenting versus staying consistent with something and tweaking it? How do you sort of think about that trade-off?
Yeah, that's a really important one. I think that there are threads that run throughout my life. And so, like, for me, I would never experiment like in veganism or even vegetarianism. And I would never experiment with like, oh, I'm going to do a high carb diet. I don't think I would do that, but actually, I know I wouldn't do that. Now, I am super interested in seeing how I would feel after these several years. And I'll answer the question, but I first want to just, you know, point this out because in January, I'm going to do like a month of paleo, a month of keto, and then the third month was going to be carnivore, but I want to see if I do like the PKD, you know, the Paleolithic Ketogenic diet. But if I did, I would probably tweak it, and I would want to speak with them first to see if they were like, you know, if they thought about my thought process, like if they agreed with it. But it's super important. I think most people, they jump around way too much. You know, they don't have like common threads. So you have to have, like, in my opinion, you have to have certain non-negotiables and certain, like, for instance, I'll never eat grains, I'll never eat sugar. And those things, you kind of stick to them. Now, like, you want to do little tweaks here and there and you want to experiment with things, then sure, go ahead. But like this year, I don't think I've done the first thing that I did this year was, you know, lowering fat. And that worked amazingly. And then other than that, I didn't really do like a specific experiment on like the other stuff, like adding the carbs. There's just so much information out there, man, and people get so confused about things, you know, like this is good, this is bad. I find myself, you know, even like, you know, and what I find is, let's say with the topic of carnivore, most of the stuff that is being argued against carnivore is, and a lot of the time it depends on who's saying it, but if it's someone who's like respected as a health, you know, guru and someone who's a scientist, I find that most of the stuff that they're saying is hypothetical, or it's like in a petri dish, or it's a mechanistic argument about like the role of this antioxidant or that, and then they talk about it like it's science, but it's not based on humans. It's not based on, it might be based on, you know, this is how things work and therefore that. But there's really no, like, I'll give you one example, like the whole turmeric thing. You know, there are people that I really respect that swear by turmeric and they're like, they love it. And then, you know, I would love for those people to speak to Dr. Georgia Ede, who's just like, yeah, but none of it gets absorbed in the blood. So how the heck is that working? Yeah. And those same people will say that carnivore is working because of the placebo effect or the nocebo effect. And they won't admit that the possibility of turmeric being the same thing is possible. And that's kind of weird, and it kind of sucks because, you know, a lot of these people, like, I respect them, and I wish that they would be less hard-headed with this stuff because, you know, especially if you spend a lot of time studying things and you get letters behind your name, and I totally respect that because, you know, I have letters behind my name and I get it. But, like, at the same time, there's things happening with the carnivore diet that people are seeing really amazing effects, and we shouldn't try to scare people by telling them that there's no science. And I was just the other day looking at I really like this Marty Kendall's optimizing nutrition group. If you ever want
yeah, that's great.
Yeah, because it's just like lots of interesting conversations. And, some guy is doing his doctoral thesis on colorectal cancer, and he's like, you people are all going to get cancer because, you don't have resistant starches. You don't have that butyrate production to protect your colon and all these things. And then it's like, here's this study, here's this study, here's this study. And I get it. I get that. But there's no studies looking at carnivores. So how could that be a thing? How could you even compare that? There's no apples to apples comparison. I'm not going to ever, well, obviously I'm not going to ever say to anyone that they shouldn't do a carnivore diet, unless there's some people that come and they ask me things like, my triglycerides went up after like a month of carnivore, or, I got gastritis. And I'm just like, honestly, you're out of my wheelhouse now. I can't help you there. I have no idea. And unfortunately, there's going to be very few people who are going to be able to give that person good information, because they're probably all going to say it's carnivore that's doing this to you. I mean, it could be, but it would be nice if someone who was actually friendly to carnivore, or I'll give an example. Like one person who would be cool to talk to, but he has his own patients, is Dr. Naiman, because Dr. Naiman, at least, he eats a really high protein diet, and most of the time it's carnivore. And so for him, I know that if someone like that spoke to him, he may be able to offer some light on, shed some light on that without immediately saying stop carnivore.
Yeah.
He may be able to say, hey, this is something you may have overlooked, or what else could it be? But you don't see that often.
Yeah, I'd love to have Dr. Ted Naiman as my doctor. But yeah, I think you raise a great point, Danny, which is the great thing about carnivore is it lends itself to this type of self-experimentation, where a lot of people can try it for 30 days, 60 days, and they'll see huge benefits. But for the people, and there's really no downside to trying things in this way, as long as you stick with it long enough to actually experience the benefits. But for people for whom it doesn't work and have conditions like the ones you mentioned, that's where sometimes you need to dig a little bit deeper. But a lot of the times just hypothesizing based on, mTOR activation in mice, is just not really relevant. And I mentioned it earlier, Danny, but you come from a strength background. You've done endurance activities. You're now doing a lot of hypertrophy style training. Can you talk a little bit about how carnivore/keto works for each of those?
Yeah, I think that for the strength stuff and the endurance stuff, it's amazing. And for the hypertrophy stuff, it could work as well. But if you're like me, then it makes it's harder, because even with the managing of the volume that we do, knowing that I'm keto, it's the hydration for me, man. It's my number one bottleneck. That's where I always get stuck. And, I'm open to hear ideas that don't include me having to slam back, 50 ounces of electrolyte drinks every day. Those aren't carnivore anyways, so I mean, even if I did that, I wouldn't be carnivore. So like for me, it's like, okay, I can do that, and possibly it could help, or I can just eat an avocado and I feel better because I get some potassium. And one of the things when we talk to Mark Bell on our podcast, he's like, carbohydrate, they hydrate. And it's true, because like I think I remember back in the day, I used to, for every gram of carbohydrate you consume, you can hold on to about 3 grams of fluid. And for someone who is trying to perform well, that extra fluid is helpful. If you're someone who's not trying to be like, I don't know, like, I don't even know what I'm trying to be. I'm always trying to do everything. I'm trying to do sprints and intervals and long distance. And I just want to be that guy who, someone says, hey, let's go climb a mountain, and I'm ready. Or someone says, let's go max out on a bench, or let's go do vertical jump. or, I want to be able to do all of it. And that's when it's like, okay, there's certain situations where I need to add some extra stuff, or it's a shortcut for me without having to think about it. And, because when I initially started doing it, I would just be making these keto muscle bowls, which was basically meat and avocado, and sometimes some cheese. But it was meat and avocado, and I was like, wow, this works great. If I could just eat meat and avocado for one meal and then meat for the other meal, that's mostly what I end up doing. Like I'll do meat and guacamole or meat and avocado, or I'll get on these sauteed cabbage kicks where I just saute a bunch of cabbage and then I'll have it for like 3 or 4 days in a row. And it's just so delicious. That's just what I do. But it's when people ask me, why am I doing that? Well, maybe it's because I do want to help with the cramping, but sometimes it's also because a lot of these foods, they taste good to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know you were recently speaking to, I can't remember which podcast it was on, but I recently heard you speaking about your kind of 2 meal a day structure.
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how that looks like for an average day for you, and why you think 2 meals a day is good? Some would say, for hypertrophy, you need to have 3 meals a day at least for optimal muscle protein synthesis. But just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh, yeah. I would never disagree with that. I think, if you're someone who carries a lot of muscle, for protein synthesis reasons, I think it's pretty well established. Like eating every 4 to 5 hours is optimal. So, that looks like a breakfast, lunch, and dinner. For me, satiety wise, I love eating a big freaking plate. My wife is the same. Like we both hated when we did this diet where we were eating like 5-6 meals a day and we were never satisfied. And now it's interesting because this week, I started it this week and it's working awesome. I'm actually, because of jujitsu, I'm not starting yet. That I'm starting in December, but we go watch the boys every day. Today's an exception because I'm with you now. So my wife is with them. But what ends up happening, because Dean goes at 5 and then Desmond goes at 5. So Dean goes from 5 to 5:30 and Desmond goes from 5:30 to 6:15. We were getting home at 6:45 and then I was cooking and then I was eating at like 7:38, and it was also pushing my sleep back because I hate to go to sleep right after eating. And so what I decided was I'm going to start eating. I'm going to cook my meal early, like 3:45, and then I'm going to eat half of it at 4 and half of it after jujitsu. And I've been doing that. And so now I kind of am having a breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So I'll have a breakfast either anytime like between 10 and 12. Today was like 12. And then my quote unquote lunch was at 4, when I had basically what I made for dinner was 14 ounces of ground beef with 6 ounces of liverwurst and 2 fried eggs and 2 ounces of Bunker Hill cheese. Ever since I've been back from Bunker Hill, or trip to Bunker Hill, I'm just eating cheese every day. And I'm like, how is it that I'm eating? It's because I guess because it's yogurt cheese and there's no lactose in it. And the fact that I'm also cutting down on my coffee, I'm leaning out like crazy. And I used to think that the cheese and the dairy would slow that down, but it's definitely not. So I cooked all this stuff and then I cut the plate in half and I take that half and I put it in a bowl and I eat that. And now when I get off the phone with you, I'll eat the rest of it. I think that if you're someone who's not as, it's really just habits. Like I have these habits of eating twice a day. It's also a pain in the butt to like eat 3 times a day when you're like, I can't get up from this computer right now. I'm trying to write, I'm trying to do stuff. So it's like, I'd rather do that. But like this little strategy that I'm using now is actually working pretty well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I personally find 2 to 3 meals a day is optimal for me. And I think if I was more focused on losing fat, I would err on the side of 2 meals a day, for satiety reasons. But right now I'm really trying to build up lean mass, and focus more on the hypertrophy side. So I'm getting that consistent, early breakfast after training, lunch at midday, and then early dinner. Seems to work well. And Danny, I know you talk about this a ton on your podcast, so folks should definitely go check out Fat Fueled Family podcast, and we'll definitely go over all the places people can find you later. But just wanted to ask, while we're on the topic of nutrition, what does a day of eating look like for your kids, and how do you kind of guide nutrition around your kids?
Yeah, so it's funny because when the boys Desmond was paleo his whole life. And then they were like, when Dean was born, unfortunately, we got lazy after like when he was like 2 or 3. And so we started to get drive-through, and we would get him fries and crap like that. And then we kind of had to reel that back in. And it was August of last year when we told them, hey, let's clean up the diet. Let's do this. And that actually started with Desmond doing a 3-day carnivore experiment. And then after he only ate meat for 3 days, because he had spent a weekend with family while Maura and I were in Puerto Rico for the weekend. We had this weekend trip, and they both had crackers and cookies, and they both came back like crap, feeling like crap, acting like crap. And so when we brought them from like carnivore to keto, we were basically still eating mostly meat, but they would have, they have some vegetables here and there. Like Desmond, at the end of our trip this last week, he and Dean every single morning would wake up and eat eggs and bacon, or eggs and sausage. And, they would eat a lot of chicken, and they would eat a lot of burger patties. So I think Desmond was like, he was just screaming for something else. And he's always been a good vegetable eater. So like he's asking for vegetables. So we started giving him a ton of vegetables, butternut squash, sweet potatoes, yams, mixed vegetables, asparagus. And so if they eat veggies, that's usually what it is. But like they'll wake up in the morning. Desmond usually makes himself eggs pretty much every morning, and he doesn't eat the whites. He'll eat the yolks, and then he'll have some bacon or some sausage. Sometimes my wife will throw in some extra leftover roasted sweet potatoes or roasted yams on his plate. And then after the gym, they'll usually have pesto chicken or burgers with cheese, just like, burger patties. My 4-year-old puts down 12 ounces of Wendy's burger patties like nothing. Like it's the most impressive thing when you think about it, because you're like, okay, you weigh 40 pounds and you're eating 12 ounces of meat in a sitting. But then, yeah. And my wife is like, lately, she's like, you know what? Let's keep giving these kids some more starches. They're bulking, and Desmond's starting to look like they're both so ripped, and Dean still has a baby body. So he's not like, he still has, a little belly, but it's not like fat. It's just kind of like, it's just his body shape. And Desmond's like he's only 7, and he can't wear like 9-year-old clothing. Like if he wears 10 to 12-year-old clothing, it's crazy. And so we're just like, hey, let's give him some sweet potato. The kid is like burning it off like crazy. He'll go to jiu-jitsu, and then he'll come out and he'll do sprints in the parking lot. He has all this energy. So I really don't care, especially with tubers, and especially knowing that, the people over at Paleo Medicina are like okay with tubers. They're definitely not fans of actual potatoes and nightshades, but sweet potatoes, they don't have a problem with. And I'm like, that gives me that confirmation. Like my kid could eat some sweet potatoes. And at the end of the day, as you know, with the Fat Fueled family, we're talking to these people about, let's eat real food. Throw out the stuff. We're starting to really try to spread the message that there's junk food in keto. Don't eat the keto junk food. Try to stay away from the sweeteners. Stay away from, the high fiber stuff and the sweeteners and all the other junk that keto does. And then if you're going to eat something that's like sweet, you will eat something that has like some real sugar in it, but it's not a lot. So like they'll eat, 90% chocolate, which I just got some for them because we hadn't had some. So I bought a 90% chocolate bar, and they'll both eat like 2 or 3 squares. I do this thing where I spoke about it this morning to Ben and Derek, and they're like, dude, that does not sound good. But I'm like, this is freaking awesome. I take pork rinds and then I'll take 2 squares of 90% chocolate, and then I'll just break that up and I'll put them all together in a bowl, and then I'll eat it with unsweetened cashew milk, and it tastes like Rice Krispies to me. It's absolutely delicious. And it's like, for me, eating meat and chocolate is like a beautiful thing. Like that's pretty much what we're going to do on Thanksgiving. Cause my wife, she got the food sensitivity panel, and she can't do turkey. She can't do pumpkin, and she can't do, what's the other one that she can't do? That's in Halloween. There's one more and so it's basically or not Halloween.
Vegetables?
But yeah, pumpkin, turkey. Well, definitely not vegetables, but pumpkin, and there was another one. And she's like, Thanksgiving is not my holiday, so we're gonna do Steaksgiving. We're gonna go to my parents, and we're gonna bring a bunch of steak. My dad is getting a bunch of pork so that my wife doesn't have to eat turkey. And nobody likes turkey anyways. I'm sorry, man. I never have liked the turkey unless it's dark meat, unless it's all dark meat, then I don't mind it. But so we're going to end up just eating a bunch of steak. And then for the desserts and stuff, she does really well with chocolate. So it's basically going to be steak and chocolate.
Yeah, that's great. And sounds like a very logical, sensible approach with your kids. When I have children, I'll definitely try to make sure they're concentrated on whole food. And nobody likes turkey. You're right. It's hard to carve, hard to cook. I wish people would serve steak at my Thanksgiving. But, Danny, you're a Renaissance man. I think that's a fair way to describe you. And how do you think about, just on the kind of mindset side, focusing versus expanding your interests and being a student again? You had a great Instagram post about this that really hit home with me.
Oh, was it the one about the jujitsu?
Yeah, like speaking to yourself.
Yeah, man, it was really I have this view of, it's been with all the meditation that I do and with all the introspection that I do, I had this view of myself, like myself in my body versus the self that, maybe where I am in space right now, like as far as like my consciousness and who I am. And I feel like I need to bring those two closer together. And like who I am as far as like my consciousness and my soul, it's someone who is trying to, I'm not a bodybuilder. I'm not this, I'm not that. I'm trying to challenge myself. I'm trying to get better, and I'm trying to find all the ways that I can make things harder for myself so that I can experience the other end of it. And so with jiu-jitsu, for instance, it's the fact that it's something completely new that I tried once and I sucked at it, so I quit. I just didn't get good because I was like, oh, I'm strong. And I'm like, well, that lasts like 30, 40 seconds until the guy who I outweigh by 40 pounds submits me every single time. And so experimenting versus, so you're saying experimenting versus, what was it?
So focusing on a smaller amount of priorities and things, just kind of in terms of time and energy management versus expanding your interests. So, I could see a world where someone would say, hey, I'm becoming an entrepreneur, full-time entrepreneur for the first time. I'm just going to focus on that versus, adding new passions and interests like jujitsu.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, I don't see that as a problem. I think that's totally fine because we have to have, our passion. If we're pursuing our passion, that's awesome, but that's not going to be the only passion. People who are passionate, they usually have a few different things. And so there's different categories, like your business and your growing your entrepreneur, growing as an entrepreneur is not going to be the only thing that you're focusing on. So, having those other outlets is super important. What I will say is that I do definitely struggle with, just seeing shiny objects and, you know, not minimizing as much as I should. You know, if I was in front of my hero, Marcus Aurelius, I'm looking at a picture of him right now because I have 3 in my office here. I have Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, and Epictetus, these 3 like panels of them. And if he were to see me, he'd be like, you're doing way too much. You know, you have to minimize. And that's honestly one of my biggest bottlenecks right now is removing all the extraneous. Now, I've gotten really good about getting away from the Instagram and answering people. So I'll have like 3 times in the day where I post, and then Facebook is like, I think it's like every other day where I get on Facebook. But if I'm talking to like a new entrepreneur, I think as far as your business goes, yeah, you have to focus on 1 or 2 things and do those things. Like that's for sure. And I'm only beginning to do that because I talked to my buddy Jay Ferrugia the other day, and he was like, you have to really simplify things. You have to, you know, cover 1 thing, share 1 thing with your people that you want them to see, that you want them to look at, and, you know, stick with that for a long time because, you know, that's the most important thing. That's your priority. You know, for the next several months, once we finish this Fat Fueled Family program, it'll be back and forth between that and the Keto Muscle program. The Keto Muscle program with me and Ben Pekulski, you know, it's just been, we've been done for a long time, but, you know, we have issues with web developers and graphics people, and it's always like that, unfortunately. But then as far as like this other stuff, I don't see a problem with, because at the end of the day, I'm a meathead. So I'm always going to be that guy who's training hard and doing, trying new physical things, new ways to challenge myself physically. So, but I have definitely tried to minimize the time, you know, so my workouts, if I'm not working out with Ben and Derek, my workouts are much shorter now. So with the exception of like Mondays, I like to walk to the gym, which is 3 miles. So right off the bat, that's like, you know, 50 minutes that I'm wasting, and then another 50 minutes walking back. But then my workout's only like 20 minutes. So it's still a long one, but you know, like on Monday of this week, my lifting consisted of 7 sets of deadlifts, 7 sets of weighted pull-ups, and 7 sets of weighted dips. And so for me, that was just like, that was perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think they necessarily conflict with each other. I think it's important to be well-rounded. And when you have different outlets for different parts of your brain, different parts of your body, even spiritually, it all builds on itself, and it can all help itself if you're able to manage it constructively, which it sounds like you really are. And building off that, Danny, I wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, the importance of loving what you do and how you knew it was the right time to leave your day job.
Oh man, that's a great question. Because it wasn't, you know, and if I would have waited, then, you know, it would have never happened. And I think after all that I learned from people who've done similar things, made similar moves, I had to do it then. I basically kind of, you know, it was over a year of burning the candle at both ends, you know, with my day job. And then really July of last year was when I actually decided that I was going to do this, that this is what I wanted to do. This was always my passion. You know, if you asked me in high school, if you would have told me this is probably what you're going to do, I would have been like, oh, that's genius. Yes, that's what I want to do. But, you know, so I saved for a year, I grinded for a year. And then, with all this money saved, I quit my job, and, you know, I could have stayed at my job longer, and I could have been a little bit had less integrity and just waited for them to fire me, or worked less. You know, I had people telling me to do that, but I just couldn't. You know, I just was like, you know what? September, that's it. September is the time. There was a combination of a bunch of things, from, you know, meeting all these different people and seeing the potential of what it could be to be doing what I'm doing now. And then, as well as some of the things that made me angry, you know, where my manager was fired, and he was, the number one manager in the company, great person, didn't break any rules, didn't do anything wrong. He just was not following the way they wanted him to manage, and he pushed back. But this was all documented, and it was easily explained. Okay, well, look, you didn't change what we tried to tell you to do, this and this and this, and you didn't, and so you're fired. And that was about 3 weeks before I quit, and that was one of like the nails in the coffin. I was like, you guys, I'm gone. You don't know, this is not what I want. They bought Monsanto last year. I was like, oh my gosh, these people bought Monsanto last year, and then there was just so many things. The culture was changing. And then I'm like, I went to a national meeting, and they had someone talking about how we can fix healthcare. And, they were talking about increasing access to medications and procedures. And I'm just like, I asked the question, and luckily it was, through text. So it was all, or not through text, through like some sort of app on our iPads. And it was anonymous. And I asked, where's all the talk about lifestyle, changing lifestyles and changing diets? And the person who was there was a speaker who wasn't involved with the company. So, I would say definitely that the answer was sincere and was honest, but the person just dismissed it. And he said, look, people don't like that. They don't like to change their lifestyles. They like to take pills. And, I guess that's an easy cop out if you don't think about it for more than a few minutes. But when you start to think about it, the way medications are pushed, we could easily be as aggressive pushing lifestyle change. Is it as profitable? No, it's definitely not. Yeah. It's definitely not. I was talking about, oh man, I'm not even going to say this story because it can get me in trouble. But let's just say that there were people that I was around in a place where I said, hey, someone was taking us on a guided tour of something, and I told the guy, he was this real cool guy from Canada, and he was living, on an island over there. And he was like, yeah, so, it seems like you like what you do. I'm like, yeah, it's pretty cool. And I think that, I don't really feel bad about what I do because I do procedures and it's in OBGYN. And so, with birth control and what I'm doing now with the IUDs and the other procedures, it's really hard to do that without, actual procedures and sometimes without medication. But, at least I'm not selling statins. And then, someone who was like the head of one of the biggest statin medications was like, well, hold on there, buddy. And I was like, oh no, this is awkward, and so it's like, all those things happened. And I was like, okay, this is why I have to go. And, people, as I quit, everyone was saying, congrats, it's so nice to know that, your business is at a point where you can quit. And every time I would tell them it's not, it's still not, and, I've had, an amazing 2 months. It's been 2 months now. Between the coaching, the podcast, the membership site, what I'm developing with Ben and what we're working on, it's been very rewarding. But then at the same time, there's nights when I wake up in the middle of the night, I'm like, what am I doing? I can't believe I'm doing this. So, what am I doing? And so, it's encouraging to see. I missed the original post, but Bedros Keuilian posted that, you've probably seen it, that post about, an entrepreneur, this is awesome, this sucks, this is great, this sucks. Yeah. And then Craig Ballantyne shared it today, and I was like, oh man, yeah, I'm posting this on my story because this is me. This is me every day, and maybe even every hour. There's always, but I know that I'm pursuing, this is my purpose. This is what fulfills me. And I know that we have something very special to offer with the Fat Fueled Family thing, like to get people healthy, to get families healthy, and to get families doing fitness together and connecting better, and doing it in a way that's authentic and not forcing things. Like, I really do think, I've found an amazing partner, which obviously helps because my wife is just the best, but we've always looked at things and we've had these conversations. No one's around. We're not trying to impress anyone when we talk about that we're trying to change the world. We have things that we hate about this world, and we both have this like really, really strong sense of justice. Like, this is what needs to happen. And, we need to do it. We need to do this so we could change the world. And like you say, well, change the world, man. Who do you think you are? But like, if you can change one thing in an area that you're really, really passionate about, and you can have like a bunch of people, whether it be 1,000 or 5,000, to me, that's you're affecting change in a way. And that's how we see like we approach things with life. So you talked about the fact that I'm a libertarian, so like we were big in the Ron Paul campaign in 2008 and 2012. And after both of those, where these things that happened were just absurd, we were like, this is never going to change. We're never going to do things politically. So from that point on, we were like instant political atheists. And for that reason, we just think the political system is not the best way to affect change. And so what can I do? I can raise kids who are emotionally intelligent. I can raise boys who are, have a passion for serving others, and who are good people and who are strong. And I can manage my own money, and I can save my money, and I can teach them how to do that. And then those values are instilled in them, and then they meet a partner with similar values, and then that's where change happens, where it's the same thing that happens with the keto thing, because, now I'm forgetting her name. The nurse that worked with Dr. Atkins, I was talking with her at KetoCon.
Nurse Jackie?
Yes, Jackie Eberstein. Yeah. So I was talking to Jackie about this, and she's like, this is never going to come from the top. There's never going to be like, the FDA is never going to be like, my bad, guys, like that's not going to happen. It's going to be grassroots. And so like, when you think about it this way, like you got a family of 4 who all of a sudden the boys, marry people who have similar values. And now you're talking about, another 2, and then you're talking about they have kids, and then their circle, and you create a tribe, and the tribe grows. And that's how change can happen. And that's the hope that I have.
Yeah, I absolutely love your philosophy, Danny. I'm all for it. And I think you were very courageous. One thing you didn't mention, just for context for folks who don't know, Danny, from what I understand, you left a lucrative career. And you have 2 boys, you have a family to support. But being truly authentic, and with this new mission for Fat Fueled Family, where you can impact so many people with what I think is such a powerful message in a place where there isn't as much content, on the specific messages you're delivering, is amazing. So I'm super excited to watch that continue to grow, and I will always be a loyal fan of your content.
Oh man, I appreciate that. Yeah, like there's probably going to be a point where I stop saying that what I made a lot of money, but I'm like, because it's like, I want people to understand that that I'm 100% real. Like, for you to leave a job that, on a good year, you can make $250,000, like it's a lot of money. Yeah. It's a lot of money, and the money is not the problem. Like when you can't buy happiness with money. What I've found in the times where I've done very well financially is that it does help with, assuaging your fears and your anxieties. You don't have to budget as hard. That makes sense if you're someone who's sensible. But, I used to tell people that, when I talked about homeschool, people who criticized what we did as far as like advocating it for everybody, and we don't advocate it for everybody, but trying to spread that message wide is like, well, you don't think about the people who only make, a household that makes 40,000 total, and how are they supposed to homeschool? And, and that's one that's, I'm not going to lie, it's very tricky because, on the one hand, in some cases, it's very, very hard to keep someone at home when they can be producing and helping, especially if they live in an expensive city. On the other hand, I would also argue that most of us are too busy with 500 channels, and we have cable, and we're, spending money on crap all the time and buying things. And so I used to say, well, if I make half of what I made, I would still do, what I would still believe this, and I would still homeschool and all that. And now I'm actually in a position where I can say that, I'm like, so, I'm less than half, I would love to be at half. That's a good spot to be in. And so for that reason, it's important, we only have one life, man. And we talked about this recently with Robert, when we had Robert on the podcast, about if I think about my mom, if my mom's life was a book, my poor mom, she's worked for Burger King corporate for 40 years, and she's gonna retire next April, at 66. And, she's worked her butt off. But if you read the book, it's you're going to have to skip from page, 20 to page 200, because it's all the same thing. Wake up, go to work, and I asked her once mistakenly, I kind of didn't word it the right way, but I was like, you mean to tell me? Because I keep telling her, you need to retire. You need to take care of your health. You need to be happy. You need to go with my dad and go do things. And she's like, well, I have to do this. I'm like, listen, you have to do this now because you've wasted enough time. I'm like, you mean to tell me that this is the life you picked? And then she was like, well, of course it was the life I picked. I love you guys and I love my children. I'm like, well, that's not what I meant. When you were growing up, you wanted to be an interior designer, and you couldn't, because you couldn't afford to pay for college, because you had to pay your car note so that you can go to work at the job that you were. And so you had to drop out of community college after a few months. And so you became a secretary, and then you moved up to another position, but you've worked for the same company your whole life. And I mean, a lot of people, they take that path and then they die. And that is the most depressing thing ever, man. More and more people, I love Gary Vee because he just doesn't give a crap. He's like, don't give me your excuses. Don't tell me anything. A lot of these guys who came from nothing, they're not hearing it. They're just not, because they went through that. They actually did it, and they went through the pain, and they went through all of that stuff. And now look at them. So, I mean, I would like to say that one day that I would be there. But at the very least, I'm being authentic, and I'm happy, and I'm doing what I want to do. I'm going to sleep at night saying, this is what I wanted to do today.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's so important. And it's sad that so few people get to reach that level of kind of self-actualization and achieving success on their own terms, whatever that means to them. Danny, this has been awesome. Where can folks find out more about you and the work you're doing?
Keto Counterculture on Facebook and Instagram, FatFueledFamily on Twitter, which we're not that big on Twitter, but then we have our FatFueledFamily YouTube, and then our website is www.fatfueled.family.
Great. Yeah. And folks, go check out the podcast, leave them a 5-star review, become a Patreon supporter. Danny, I think you're doing awesome work, and look forward to sharing this with folks.
Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Carnivore Cast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And share it with a friend. What questions would you like answered? Or who would you like to hear from in the carnivore research community? You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at CarnivoreCast, or go to carnivorecast.com. You can also email me at info@carnivorecast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep it carnivore.